Great. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's special session on the waiting list process. This is our first in a series of special session trainings we're going to be providing. This is a part one of two parts related to the waiting list process, the voucher issuance, the briefing, and so on. It's a really large process, and we're going to break it into two different presentations. The very last slide will discuss what's coming next as our part two. So we'll get started. Today's agenda for this special session, we're going to talk about opening and closing the waiting list, the different local preferences that the Division of Housing incorporates into our waiting list process. We're going to talk about our two application process that we use here at the Division of Housing. We'll go into detail about how to purge existing waiting lists. We have a number of frequently asked questions that we hear frequently from all of you that we wanted to address. And then we have a list of really what I think are good resources, then an opportunity for questions at the end. So let's just get started. We know, again, in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or also known as the Section 8 program, the Division of Housing has opted for a waiting list as our access point. Now, Housing Authority can opt for opening a waiting list, conducting an annual or semi-annual lottery, which is just a one-time, everyone applies, they randomly draw, and then whoever didn't get drawn is taken off the out of the lottery, and then they can start the process over their next lottery. But we've opted to maintain waiting lists that individuals can apply for. They are dynamic. So today, if an individual applied for a waiting list and had 3 preferences, but tomorrow they only have 2 preferences, that waiting list can be updated. And so a person's position is not, it's static. It's not going to stay in one position. They can move up and down on the waiting list depending on their preferences or the preferences of the other applicants on the waiting list. Something we don't talk about in the slides, but I do want to mention, we've opted to weight our preferences as 1 point each. So no preference that we'll talk about in a few slides has more points than another preference. This is important because we anticipate serving highly vulnerable populations with our programs, and we want to make sure we're not identifying one population as having more vulnerability than another, because as we know, I think it's equal. And so we weight our preferences equally. But before we can start issuing vouchers to applicants on the waiting list, we have to open the waiting list so we can start collecting those applications. What I've provided here today is the federal regulation 24 CFR 982.206, specifically as it relates to the required public notice when you open a waiting list. And so what this is stating is that when the PHA, or you all as our partners who act as an arm of the PHA, opens a waiting list, you must give public notice that families may apply for that tenant-based assistance. And the public notice, and again, we'll have some better specific details. This is just our regulation speak here. That public notice must state where and when to apply. It has to be published in a local newspaper of general circulation, and also by minority media and other suitable means. That's going to look different in every community. We published our public notice that our admin plan and our PHA plan are open for comment in the Denver Post, because that is the media of the widest publication in Colorado. However, we've also posted it on our website so that anybody can access it if they don't have access to the Denver Post. And again, in each community, it looks different. I've worked with some of you in much smaller communities where there isn't necessarily a newspaper that most people read, but a town newsletter that goes out to most people in the town. And so that's appropriate. It does say newspaper in the regulation, but I mean, it's 2023. So we can be, we can use what the regulation says and kind of build on it, what makes the most sense in your community. And that notice must comply with HUD fair housing requirements, meaning that if somebody needs additional assistance from what you're stating in your public notice, again, we'll have an example of that shortly, that we offer accommodations to individuals so they have equal access to what's being offered in the public notice. And the public notice must state any limitations on who may apply for available slots in the program. For example, what preferences is the waiting list being open for? So this is HUD speak, right? They give us some very basic regulations, and then we must expand on them through our admin plan. And so the next slide goes a little bit into our required outreach. So we have to, again, as the previous slide stated, we have to comply with fair housing requirements when we open our waiting lists and we provide notice. What's important to understand is that we're not trying to open our list so that just some people in our community will know how to access it. We want to make sure that everybody in our community who may be eligible for the resource that we have can get the information that that waiting list is going to be open. And before we open our waiting list, we ask that we identify underserved populations, and then we target those underserved populations in your community. And then you make sure your outreach efforts are targeting those underrepresented populations. It's a lot to say. If you're in a specific community and you know the need in your community are people who are experiencing homelessness, that is your greatest need in your community. You can put something in the newspaper, but are the people who need that resource the most reading the newspaper? Maybe. But what you can also do is make sure the people in your local shelters or your local homeless service providing agencies also have the information that your waiting list is going to be open. So that's what we mean by outreach. The Division of Housing is a statewide housing authority. We could open a waiting list once a year and say it's for everyone in the state of Colorado. That would be so inefficient because what the need is in Grand Junction may not be the same need that we have in Sterling. And so that's why we look to you all as our partner agencies to identify that underserved population in your community. And then you work to target the resources that we have when you open your waiting list to make sure that's the population that's going to get this information. And then we want to avoid, again, the same thing, avoid outreach efforts that exclude people in protected classes. Don't just publish it in, the country club newsletter. Make sure that everybody has that opportunity to see that the waiting list is open. That can't always happen just by posting it. You post it in your building where people may be coming in for resources. You post it at local community centers. You do your best effort to make sure people understand. And some of you are very aware, there are some organizations in our communities that find out about open waiting lists, who work with our underserved populations in Colorado, who get very excited because resources are limited, and they might publish it to their mailing list of 10,000 people that they serve in Colorado. And I don't mean to laugh when I say that, but we have seen it happen where an agency is very intentional in opening their waiting list for just one day because they know it's going to be a large response. And then when an organization is trying to help their participants learn about this resource, we end up with thousands of people applying for the waiting list. So there's a fine balance to reaching the underserved populations without, standing on the mountaintop and announcing it to everybody. This is an example of a public notice. I believe I say this in another slide, but just in case I don't, we're required to post the public notice 30 days in advance of when the waiting list is going to open. And what we've provided here, and this is something your SPOC will also provide to you when you let them know you're getting ready to open your waiting list or you're interested in possibly talking about what that looks like to open your waiting list. But we would just want to make sure that the public notices that our agencies are using are consistent in following our template that we utilize. And so in this one, you'll see the red is where you're going to put your specific information relating to how you're opening your waiting list. We want to make sure that they know that it's the Department of Local Affairs Division of Housing, because that's the HUD identified public housing authority. In conjunction with you, our partner agency is going to open the Housing Choice Voucher Program waiting list for, now you let them know how long. It's going to be open for 1 day, 1 week, 3 days, 2 days, whatever it is, you list that date. And you want to be clear that it's going to be open on, March 1st, and it's going to close on March 2nd at 11:59 p.m. So that there is a very clear time frame and there can be no challenges later. Well, I turned it in on March 3rd, but it was 12:01 a.m. We've seen it. So just make sure you're clear so that we can have that firm cutoff date as applications, continue to come in after that date. And then you will identify who the waiting list is going to be open to. It's going to be open to applicants who meet DOH's local preferences then you list those local preferences. We're going to talk about those in a minute. But what HUD says is that a housing authority can identify who they want to serve in their community using what local preferences. We've identified what our local preferences are in our administrative plan, and that hasn't changed with our newest administrative plan. But that's who we are going to be serving with our vouchers. That's who the Division of Housing has identified are the populations we wish to serve with our vouchers. You're going to go on to say how they can get an application from you. Strongly suggest, recommend, demand that we don't publish our applications on websites. Because when that happens, and we've learned this because we used to publish the application on our website, on our forms page that are available to you all, the contractors. But that's also available to anybody in the entire world who has access to the internet and can figure out how to get places. When we used to post our application online, or when some of you all partner agencies would post it online to make it more convenient for people applying, we would get applications from all over the country. People, assuming we had an open waiting list because we are a housing authority, and we had a letter that we would just send back to say, we're very sorry, this isn't how it works. So again, strong recommendation that you do not provide it on your website. You can keep them, copies in your office. You can mail them out. There's different ways your SPOCs can help you problem solve. But then you want to go on to let them know how you're going to accept those applications. You can turn them in on this date in person from this time to this time. You can fax them. You can email them to this address. You can mail them in, but it must be postmarked in that time frame that we said the waiting list will be open. And then, of course, we want to include the accessibility and accommodation language, that if somebody in their household is a person with a disability and they need an accommodation to be able to access this application in a different way, we want to provide that information here as well. Because the key is that we make sure this opportunity is available to everyone, that no barrier will get in the way of people applying. So just a few details on opening versus closing the waiting list. Good, I did mention this. When we open the waiting list, we require a minimum 30-day notice. We have to give people 30 days to get their stuff ready, be prepared, to apply, let it sit in that newspaper, for 30 days so that people can see it. Maybe they missed it that one day you posted it, but they can see it the next day. It'll still be saved in the archives. And then closing the waiting list, we don't have as formal of a process. Sometimes agencies in more populated communities will truly just have it open for 1 day, maybe 2 days. So that's identified in the public notice. I'm going to open it on this date. I'm going to close it on this date, and we're done. And then some of you have more rural communities that you're serving, where you don't have as many people kind of coming through, and your waiting list is open all the time. You maybe opened it a couple of years ago and it just is open. And then people come in and apply, and you're just always adding them to your waiting list. That's always open. And that's okay too. We ask that you use your own discretion. You know your community, you know your workload, you know how many people are calling or coming in to complete an application. You can close your waiting list at any time if you're finding that, yikes, we need to keep it closed, or somebody found out that we had an open waiting list and they're sending everybody here now. But if you are going to reopen it, you have to follow that public notice, that 30-day minimum notice time frame, and publishing it in the newspaper, or publication of mass consumption in your community. Our recommendation is that you close your waiting list when it contains an adequate pool, and that looks different for everyone. General practices are you have a 1 to 2 year list, no more, a wait list amount, 1 to 2 years. So if you had a 12-month waiting list, our largest agency in Denver, that might look like 300 people. They could get through 300 people in 1 year. Whereas a smaller community 20 people might be 1 year's worth of a waiting list. You have to decide based on how many times you're issuing vouchers and turning them over, what that looks like. And we can help you kind of identify what a good time frame might look like. Reach out to your SPOC about that. So let's talk about our local preferences. At the Division of Housing, we have 5 preferences. They're considered local preferences, meaning these are the preferences we have identified make the most sense in our communities. The first one is people experiencing homelessness. This is the literal definition for homelessness, not the McKinney-Vento. Maybe I shouldn't say that. That might not be correct, but it's not the chronic homelessness definition where they're homeless X amount of times in a 3-year period. It's that when they apply for your waiting list, they are literally homeless. This is defined here. Sleeping in a place not designed for or used as a regular sleeping accommodation, that's sleeping in a car, a park, an abandoned building, a train station, the airport, camping, or if they're living in a shelter designed to provide temporary living arrangements, that can be an emergency shelter, a congregate shelter, transitional housing, which we know could, be a long-term program, but not really because there's an end date. Hotels or motels that are paid by a charitable organization or by government programs, or they're exiting an institution where they had resided for less than 90 days, and prior to that, we're residing in an emergency shelter or place not meant for human habitation. And so these would be what they would need to qualify for to check off that they qualify for that experiencing homelessness preference. Now, it's important to note when you open your waiting list and you are accepting the applications just to get on the waiting list, there's no requirement that they have to verify their preference at that time. Nothing needs to be verified at the time of application. It's the time where we start getting ready. We have a voucher coming, or we have a voucher today. We want to let those applicants know you're getting close to the top of the list. Now let's make sure you still meet these preferences. These are still the people in your household that you identified when you applied. We'll talk about that. But important to note, you cannot require that people verify their preference at the time of application. Our second local preference are households that include a person with a disability. And so for purposes of HUD's local preference, we're defining disability here, and that is any person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. They have a record of having such an impairment, or they're regarded as having such an impairment. HUD regulations do not allow us, the PHA, to adopt a preference for admission of persons with specific disabilities. So for example, we can't say this is open to people who have a mental health diagnosis only. As far as HUD is concerned, disability is anybody who meets that definition in the first bullet. This is determined by a knowledgeable medical professional that can say, yes, I can say from my experience working with this person, they meet this definition, or if they receive Social Security information or Social Security income specific to their disability. Again, they don't have to prove any of that. until they come to the top of your waiting list. And I just said that. Must not require that an applicant be an active participant with your agency to apply. We partner with a lot of disability service providing agencies. That's intentional partnership. Again, because we're trying to target some of the underserved populations in Colorado with our vouchers. So we do that through our intentional partnerships. 100 years ago, many of you may recall, and I recall because I was here, we used to have waiting lists that were specific to your agency and your agency's consumers only. And so I worked at a community mental health center in Adams County. When the housing authority would tell me you have 5 vouchers to issue, I could open my waiting list to just the consumers that were receiving services through my community mental health center. And it was a lovely opportunity for me to be able to provide housing to our specific clientele. What happened later on is that HUD completed an audit, as they do. And when they learned that was how we were distributing vouchers, it was a huge fair housing red flag, huge. We weren't making the HUD resource, which is a federally funded resource available to anybody who meets the definition. We were only making it specific, in my example, to people with mental health diagnoses at the mental health center that I worked at. Again, it was intended for good intentions, right? But the impact that it had was that we were actually keeping other people who were eligible for a federal resource from getting that resource. Not good. And so we have moved away from that model. We moved away from that model 2008, a long time ago. But it's sort of it was a hard shift. And I think we're still kind of seeing a little bit of that. All that to say, when you open your waiting list, you can set your local preferences, but you must take an application from anyone, even if it's not someone who receives services from your organization. Our third local preference are households that include victims of domestic violence. Here is the definition that HUD uses for this preference. This is somebody who is currently experiencing domestic violence resulting in a need for housing. This is hard to quantify. This is hard to verify. Domestic violence is not a one-size-fits-all preference. And so a lot of times when people select this as their preference, they come to the top of the waiting list. We have a lot of different ways that this can be verified. If it is not, quote unquote, black and white to you as you're looking at their preferences, we can help walk you through it because currently experiencing domestic violence resulting in a need for housing could very likely mean I'm a person in a relationship. I live in the household with this person. They are the perpetrator of domestic violence. I am the victim. I need to move, but I can't because I cannot afford to move. This voucher will help me leave this perpetrator and be safe. That feels clear, right? You can make that connection. It's a currently experiencing the violence and need housing as a result of it. That's not to say that somebody could have a million other scenarios happening. Where currently experiencing violence means they have left that person, but the person continues to know where they are. That's one of a million examples. I won't go through them all. This is gray. This is as gray as it gets. And because of the Violence Against Women's Act, it's very important that we really take a look at the preference verifications. If you have any questions on whether or not it's an okay preference verification, we are here to help walk you through that. So domestic violence means an act or threatened act of violence upon a person with whom the actor is or has been involved in an intimate relationship. And then Colorado, of course, has a law that defines what intimate relationship is. And that's a relationship between spouses, former spouses, past or present unmarried couples, or persons who are both the parents of the same child, regardless of whether the persons have been married or have lived together at any time. So it is a very broad definition, which makes our preference verifications challenging at times. Again, despite the challenge that it comes with verifying this preference, because not everybody reports. Okay, there's again another reason why this is challenging. We still want to be able to provide this resource. So this is an important underserved population in our communities. Let us help you. Please don't feel like it's too complicated that you don't want to use it as one of your local preferences. We do want to be able to access this population. And currently with our emergency housing vouchers that we have been awarded by HUD, we are able to access this population. We are learning a lot. And so we really do want to continue to offer our housing to victims of domestic violence. Our fourth local preference is very specific, and it takes up a lot of space in this title. It's for non-elderly disabled families. So non-elderly, not yet reached their 62nd birthday, and a person with a disability who has not yet reached their 62nd birthday, who is transitioning from a nursing home or other approved institutional settings. Those institutional settings include mental health institutes, nursing homes, or institutions for individuals with developmental disabilities. Unfortunately, this does not consider jail or prison as an institution. That's a frequently asked question I don't think we have in this presentation, but that is a question we often get with that preference. So this is a very specific population. Any of you who work with our community access team knows that our nursing homes currently include people who are non-elderly. I grew up in a small community in the Midwest where the nursing home is where people who were older go when their families couldn't care for them anymore. That is not the case. That is not what's happening in nursing homes. Nursing homes are sort of a place of last opportunity for our unhoused populations, people with disabilities who don't have enough income to pay rent, and there's nowhere else for them to go. They're becoming those sorts of institutions, which is not appropriate. Those institutions should be for a very, specific population of people. So HUD has identified this as a problem, as a concern, and one way we can approach that is through our NED, non-elderly disabled, to use our vouchers to help empty those nursing homes of these populations of people that shouldn't be there. We also have our community access team program, making a quick plug for that, where we get our referrals from the state Medicaid agency to help transition people out of nursing homes and other institutions similar into housing in the community with a voucher, which is the only way they can afford it. So again, strong proponent of this preference as well. I'm a strong proponent of all of our preferences. And then finally, sort of new, I think we added this maybe 5 or 6 years ago. We're giving an additional preference point to anyone who's a current participant in a DOH rental assistance program, including permanent supportive housing, our any number of our state housing voucher programs, our mental health, our homeless solutions programs, or our reentry state housing voucher program. Anyone who has a community access team voucher, anyone in a Section 811 project rental assistance development, any of our former TBRA, tenant-based rental assistance, any of our former rapid rehousing participants. The reason we will give an extra point, so these participants won't be eligible for the homeless point preference because they are housed, but they could be eligible for a disability preference. They could be eligible for a domestic violence preference, and they could be eligible for this, the current participant in a DOH rental assistance program. We see our housing programs as a continuum, where the housing choice voucher tends to be a more independent, very, not a lot, if any, services kind of mixed in with those vouchers. But these that you see on the screen right now are programs that oftentimes do have a little bit more intense services that kind of go along with the voucher. And they are intended for people who have higher needs. What happens, and this is wonderful, is that people stabilize once they have gotten their PSH voucher, they've connected with services, they've had a place to live for a while, and now everything's sort of fallen into place and they don't need that same level of assistance that they once did. We want to keep those vouchers open to the next group of people that need that level of assistance. And in order to do that, we want to be able to provide a continuum so they can get those extra points and move on to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Just trying to keep track of time because I could talk for days. Okay, so those were our preferences. What I didn't put on here, we also have a secondary preference, which is date and time. So of course you could open your waiting list and say it's for disability preference only. So everyone who applies has that 1 point for disability preference because you've only opened it for that. So we need a secondary way to sort them or rank them on the waiting list, and that's by including a date and time stamp. And so when you're entering the applications into our system, you will be asked to put a specific date and time that they applied. That helps us rank the list, sort the list into the correct position. So the Division of Housing uses a two-step application process when we open our waiting list and start taking on applicants. It starts with the pre-application. That is one of the handouts I sent. I sent a lot of handouts. I think there was a total of 13 handouts that go along with this presentation. We're probably not going to get into them, but they are available. They will also be available on the website as one large PDF document. But we'll make sure that you have the Word versions of those template letters as well. One of those handouts is the pre-application. This is a 1-page plus the supplement that HUD requires us to have individuals complete. But it's intended to be an easy access point to get on the waiting list. We need a certain amount of demographic information to get a person on the waiting list. And this 1-page pre-application is that form. It's going to collect the bare minimum that we need. It's going to be as low barriers possible for our participants to complete. It would be great to have every bit of information that we could think of, but when somebody sees a 5 or 6 page, whatever our full application is up to now, they might just say not interested. It's too much paperwork. So we want to have this 1-pager pre-application that our families can fill out to get on the waiting list. It again only collects the information we need to make that initial assessment. And that initial eligibility determination. Did they select the preference that we opened our waiting list for? Did they sign it? Did they date it? Did they provide their social security number? We just need those little bits of information. This is that form. Again, no verification will be conducted at the time of application. They don't have to verify that they have a social security card or that they meet a certain preference or that they have an ID or that all these children that they've put on the application are in the household. This is not the time to verify that. Again, the pre-application is not published on our website, and please don't publish it on yours because then we find that we get a lot of interesting applications and we're not sure if they really did apply and they requested an application for somebody's open waiting list or if they just found it. So it becomes a little bit of a fair housing issue if we can't determine where it originated. And when you do open your wait list, we pre-populate that pre-application for you before we send it to you to make copies so that should it end up on our doorstep, which it sometimes does because we're the housing authority, we can see, oh, this belongs to mental health partners. We'll get that right over to them. So again, one of our red flags is that if a pre-application comes in without an agency's name pre-populated on it, like where did it come from? It's a mystery for us to solve. Okay, so you've opened your waiting list. The pre-application is in the universe. Let's talk about that process for accepting the applications. That process must be accessible to all individuals with a disability, individuals who are elderly, and individuals with limited English proficiency. Again, we cannot have a resource that is funded by the federal government and then inadvertently, unintentionally, not let people know that that resource is available. And oftentimes people with disabilities, people who are elderly, and people with limited English proficiency miss out on opportunities because they're not at the table. They can't truly read the public notice because it's not in the language that they're familiar with. So we offer that opportunity. If you need additional assistance, let us know, we will accommodate. And then also publishing it, going back to the HUD regulation, in a minority publication. So if you're in a community where there is a large population of people who speak Spanish, for example, and you know that there is a Spanish speaking news outlet or a newspaper or something along those lines, we really strongly encourage you to also publish it in that language in that publication, so that we are not, again, inadvertently, unintentionally excluding populations from our resource. You're going to do a really quick preliminary assessment of the eligibility. Did they sign it? Did they fill it out? Do we have the information we need to get them on the waiting list, or to verify that, yes, you included that you're a person experiencing domestic violence? That wasn't one of the preferences, unfortunately. And so, again, one of the handouts that goes along with this presentation are some different templates of letters that you can send, like, hey, we got your application, looks like it's missing something. Here it is. Complete that missing part, get it back to us by this deadline. Hey, we got your application. Unfortunately, you didn't meet any of the preferences that we were open for this time. If this is incorrect, let us know. You can request an informal review. However, at this time, we can't put you on the waiting list. So we have several examples of how you will acknowledge that you got that application. In the basic one, hey, we got your application. Everything looks great. If anything changes, in terms of your contact information, let us know, but assume you're on the waiting list. But as those applications roll in, you want a way to date and time stamp them. Again, you could opt to randomly sort your waiting list. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty because we are going to do a part 2 where we really talk about that. But you can truly say it's date and time. What might end up happening is that at 2 o'clock in the morning, people start lining up outside your agency to be the first in line. Or you can say it's just going to be randomly sorted. No first come, first serve. You all just get your applications to us by this time. This also helps. You don't have to actually be date and time stamping it. And then we will randomly place you. They'll still get those points for whatever preferences they qualify for. They'll still float to the top, but then everyone's assigned a random date and time that they're put on the waiting list so that you avoid 2,000 people lining up on February 1st outside your building at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is a real experience that happened to one of our agencies. We weren't expecting it, right? So we've learned from that. If the application is approved, you're going to send a letter letting them know they've been placed on the list within 30 days of them applying. And so, again, template letter provided for that. If the application is going to be denied for any reason, and there should just be a few reasons why we're denying an application. Again, they didn't fill out everything they needed to fill out. It's not signed, it's not dated. They selected a preference that you didn't identify in the public notice was your local preference for your waiting list. We have to send them a certified letter within 30 days of the application, letting them know that we've determined they're ineligible or their application is missing something, either way. And there is language in those letters about requesting an informal review. That's that. Okay, managing the waiting list. So depending on your program size and how often you are issuing vouchers, the full application can be completed at several different points in the process. Now, the full application, I think I'm off a slide here, but it collects all the information that we sort of collected on the pre-application, but in great detail. We ask for a lot of information in that. Great. In the pre-application, tell us what your annual income is. In the full application, we want to know every source of income, what you get a month, who that source of income's from, give us the contact information. It's a lot of information. So if you are a large agency and you know that everyone who has applied for your waiting list, you might not get to some of them until 18 months from now, right? They're not going to come to the top of your list. Don't do that full application. If you are a very small agency serving a very small community, it might be worth it when you open your waiting list to, or if your waiting list is open all the time, to have that full application. Just get the information now, because you're not going to have to review hundreds, thousands of applications. You know your program's small, like the next available voucher is probably going to go to this person. Just get that information down in writing right away. There are opportunities for you to get that full application at a later point. We'll talk about that. I already said that for smaller programs. It just speeds up your process. When they come to the top of the list, you already have everything you kind of need to know. For larger programs where vouchers might be issued on a weekly or monthly basis, consider sending the full application to the top 5 or 10 applicants on your waiting list at any given time, to start that eligibility piece proactively. That way, when those folks do come to the top of your list, and you know that will probably happen in the next week or month because of how frequently your vouchers are turning over, you've got that initial eligibility kind of started, and you don't have to start from scratch. You cut a couple days off of that time frame. It's just a little bit more efficient. We call it a mini purge. For you larger agencies, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's talk about that full application. This is the second step of our 2-step application process. The full application is going to be filled out by families when they reach the top of your waiting list, ideally. Again, last slide we talked about for smaller agencies, you know, may just be in your best interest to have them fill it out right away. But the process that we've identified is a short pre-application to get them on the list, then the full application when they come to the top of the list. Because when they applied, it could have been, you know, John Doe. And then in 18 months, when John Doe comes to the top of the waiting list, John Doe now has a spouse, a child, or John Doe no longer has a spouse. The family dynamics change in that time frame. So what you collected initially could be very different now. Again, if John Doe has added a spouse and children, we can't say, sorry, you didn't have them on your initial application. Of course, when they come to the top of the waiting list, whatever their family dynamics are at that time is what we're considering them, the household. And this full application, again, sent to you as a handout, is going to verify income, preferences or preference, social security number of all household family members. It's going to talk about like ID and birth certificate information that we'll then verify once we get those documents. They are signing consents and releases for us to run background checks on them. And they are declaring their citizenship status. So the process when someone has come to the top of the waiting list, well, first you need to run your waiting list, or request a copy of your waiting list from your SPOC. This is our recommended process, is that you send the pre-briefing letter. That's that get ready, you're coming close to the top of the list, or you're at the top of the list letter. That was one of the handouts. And the full application. You're going to mail this to the top applicants on your waiting list to get that process started. And in that letter, you're providing applicants with a deadline to respond and provide their full application along with documentation that we are requesting, so we can determine that initial eligibility before we invite them in for a briefing. This is important. If somebody is not eligible, and we can tell because they're making too much money, nobody in the household has eligible citizenship status, nobody in the household meets the preference that they once applied for, we don't want to bring them in, have them go through the briefing just to then tell them, sorry, you're not eligible at this time. This is a better, more efficient way to kind of verify that eligibility before bringing them into the briefing. So a couple what ifs. What if the applicant does not respond to that pre-briefing letter and the full application that you sent? So if the letter is not returned by the post office and the applicant does not respond by the date we asked them to on the letter, we have to remove that applicant from the waiting list. Now, when they applied and we sent them the congratulations, you're placed on our waiting list letter, in that letter, we say, if your address or your contact information changes, please let us know. This is the only way we have to contact you. when you come to the top of the waiting list, it's important that we have accurate information about you and where we can reach you. Second bullet, if the letter is returned by the post office and there's no forwarding address, it just says return to sender, we remove the applicant from the waiting list. Third, if the letter is returned by the post office and it does have a forwarding address and that little yellow sticker, send a new pre-briefing letter with a new deadline and new application to that new address. Start that timeline over. Again, then go back to the beginning. You've resent it. If they don't return it by the deadline and it's not returned by the post office, and so on. What if the applicant does respond? That is wonderful. If the applicant responds and determined eligible based on what they provided in response, they've completed the full application, they've provided what you've asked them to about their income, about their citizenship status, and then they can, it's, they've filled out the full application, they're still checking homeless, they're still checking disability preference on that. We're still not verifying quite yet, but they're still saying, yes, I still qualify for these preferences. They are eligible to come in for briefing at this time. If the applicant responds and it is determined that they are ineligible because, again, they're making too much income, there's nobody in the household that has eligible citizenship status, they no longer meet the preferences that they applied for, send them a letter letting them know they can appeal our decision, but we are not able to serve them at this time. Scratch what I just said about preferences, because that's our third bullet. They still can say, oh, no, you're calculating my income wrong, or I'm sorry, I checked the wrong box. We want to give them that opportunity to appeal and have that conversation. So we're clear that the reason we're denying their application is for the right reason. If an applicant responds but no longer meets the preferences that determine their place on the waiting list, we're going to remove those preferences that they no longer meet, and then your SPOC's going to help you replace them on the waiting list, resort the waiting list so that they fall in the correct position. And then again, we'll pull the next person from your waiting list and start the process over. So let's talk about purging the waiting list. First, I just need to take a sip. Purging the waiting list is a very important process, especially if you have hundreds of people on your waiting list and you're not kind of getting through that waiting list super fast. I mean, that makes sense that you wouldn't. By the time maybe you get to number 200, it's been a year since they've applied. You're going to reach out. Great, I have a voucher. I'm going to send a letter to, Bob on the top of the waiting list. Well, Bob is gone. Bob's moved to Michigan. Bob no longer needs a voucher. Something happened. Bob is no longer available. Bob never told you, right? That they moved or that they no longer need the resource. We found out because we sent the letter, the pre-briefing letter in the packet, and it was returned by the post office. Now we have to send the next one. We are taking a lot of time away from eligible households on that waiting list who are ready. If we don't have a really current, active, good waiting list with good information on it. So we recommend that agencies purge their waiting list once a year. We're going to talk about what that process looks like. And we call it a full purge, not just that sending to the top 5 or 10, every month while you're getting ready to issue vouchers, although that's a really good system for larger agencies. We still recommend a full purge on an annual basis of your waiting list. And then if you're going to be opening your waiting list, but you still have a handful of people on your waiting list from the last time you opened it, we recommend you purge before opening your new waiting list so that everyone who remains from the last time you opened are still there and ready for the voucher. You're going to send the update request letter or the purge letter and a blank pre-application form via first class mail to the last known address on file. So again, if people moved and they didn't tell you what can we do, right? What we have is what they told us on that initial pre-application. We've put that into our elite system. If they don't let us know that they have a new address, all we have is that last known address in our system to send the purge letter and the new application to. I know some of you kind of go the extra mile to check maybe I know that 5 of these people are consumers at my agency, or I know that they might be an HMIS. Let me check HMIS. I applaud that. That is wonderful. It is not fair to the 10 other people who aren't connected to your agency or who might not be an HMIS that we're making really extreme efforts to reach some, but not all. The fairest way to do it is to do a full purge where everyone gets the same letter. And if they didn't let us know, our hands are tied, unfortunately. If the address they gave us was their mom's address and the mom gets them their mail and the mom didn't get them the mail in time, we can talk about those case-by-case basis. No, you know what I mean. But this is the most fair housing way for us to get a good, clean waiting list, is to purge following this process. The purge letter, which we provided a template, must provide a date and deadline by which they have to respond. It must state in the letter that failure to respond will result in the removal from the waiting list. Therefore, when I am audited and they say, why did you remove this person from the waiting list? They didn't respond to the purge. Here is the letter that we sent them that told them that action would happen. And then the auditor says, okay, you followed process. The letter must state that the applicant has the right to an informal review. Again, mom gets their mail. Mom was on vacation. Mom comes back and says, you used my address again. Here's this letter you got. It seems important. They can come and appeal. It wasn't me not responding. It was I didn't get access to my mail. Let's see, if the letter is returned with no forwarding address, we remove the applicant from the waiting list. And then again, if the letter is returned by the post office with a forwarding address, we're going to create a new letter and a new pre-application, and we're going to send it out, and then follow this process again. If that letter is returned by the post office with no forwarding address, we will remove them from the waiting list. Hey, I'm repeating myself, but I think it's important. If the letter is returned with a forwarding address, start the process over. And I said it, but I'm going to say it again. If there is a reason we remove the family from the waiting list and it can be verified that it was our error, our mail merge was off a cell in the Excel spreadsheet, happens, or something else that was our error, or there were circumstances beyond the family's control, we will look at that in our office. We can look at those on a case-by-case basis to make sure that we're following protocol and everyone has the opportunity to access the program in a fair way. So some frequently, I'm not wearing a watch, some frequently asked questions that we receive. What do I do and if an applicant comes to the top of the list but is not ready to receive a voucher at that time? Can they go to the bottom of the list or retain their current placement? We serve very vulnerable populations with our program. And oftentimes when a wait list opens, because they don't open frequently, case managers, social workers, community organizations get everyone they know on their caseload and they apply, sometimes on their behalf, sometimes the person didn't sign it, but it's signed in proxy, by proxy by a case manager or something along those lines, because they know the resources are few and far between, so they get everyone on their caseload on the list. Again, I applaud this. This is wonderful. It's a wonderful case management technique to get the resources to your people. Sometimes when that person comes to the top of the list, they're not ready for a variety of reasons. Unfortunately, we cannot say, oh, you're not ready. Okay, let us put you back on the list. Once they come to the top of the list, an offer must be made. If they meet those, they still meet that preference. They are income eligible. If they meet those eligibility tests that we do, we have to offer them the voucher. if they can't take it at this time, we cannot put them back on the waiting list. Are there reasonable accommodations that might change our mind on that? Absolutely. But because we want to be consistent in the way we handle this for all of you, because there are 50 agencies out there with 50 different waiting lists, so we can't do it differently. Those need to come in to DOH for us to make that determination. Can I advertise the jurisdiction covered by my agency in my notice announcing the opening of the waiting list? Great question. I am the Community Mental Health Center in Adams County. Because I used to work there, that's the only reason I'm calling them out. When I open my waiting list, can I just say residents of Adams County only may apply? If you were the Adams County Housing Authority, yes, you could, because HUD has determined your jurisdiction is Adams County. And so absolutely, you can say you must live in Adams County when you get your voucher. We are the Colorado Division of Housing. And our jurisdiction as deemed by HUD is the entire state, all 64 counties in Colorado. So we're unique. We know that. We partner with all of you so we can serve all 64 counties. So unfortunately, because HUD identifies us as the housing authority, not all 50 of our agencies out there doing the work, in the local communities, HUD says, no, the Division of Housing's jurisdiction is a state, so we can't turn away or advertise somebody who applies that doesn't live in the community that your agency serves. We tried to request a waiver for that many years ago, and HUD just scratched their head. They don't understand that we're unique, as much as we try and tell them that we are. How often should I purge my waiting list? This depends on your waiting list size. Our suggestion to you is that you purge at least annually. How long do I have to advertise? There's no length requirement. You can publish that your waiting list is open every day in the newspaper, every day at the community center if you want to. The only requirement is that initial notice goes out at least 30 days before your waiting list opens. That is the only requirement that HUD has. Do we need to advertise when we close the waiting list? There is not a requirement that you advertise when you close the waiting list. You can decide tomorrow that your waiting list is closed. And so when someone comes in and says, my brother just applied for your waiting list, I'm here to apply for your waiting list, you can say, I'm sorry, today our waiting list is closed. If we will reopen it, we will give a 30-day notice to do so. What if an applicant cannot verify a preference that was on their pre-application when they came to the top of the waiting list? So again, that preference will be removed, or we'll take it out of Elite. It gives them less points. And we will resort them back onto the list so that they fall into the proper position, or we call it resequencing the list. So, you just let your SPOC know, okay, this person came to the top of the waiting list. They did say they were a person experiencing homelessness and a person with a disability. They are no longer experiencing homelessness. We'll go in and we'll take away that point. We'll resequence the list, and then they will fall using that date and time as a backup that was attached to their initial application. They'll fall to the proper position in the line. Again, you could be number 2 on the waiting list today and number 12 on the waiting list next week because we have a dynamic preference system where preferences can change. And we want to make sure the people we're being served by our waiting list, the people at the top of the waiting list are the people with the most preferences, which we can not qualitatively, but quantitatively verify and prove to HUD we're serving the people with the highest points. We're not going to get into, but this person has a much higher need. We just want to show that we have a fair wait list weighting WEIGHT system. What if an applicant is determined to be over income when they come to the top of the waiting list? And again, we'll dig into this in our next series, but if an applicant is over income, they're not eligible for the voucher. We have a few bits of eligibility testing we have to do before we can put the voucher in their hand. Income is one of them. Every April, we don't publish, HUD publishes, and then we share with you what the income limits are for each county. I provided the letter that we have, a template letter about eligibility mandatory denial. There are some reasons we would deny somebody. You would use that letter, you would check off income, and that's how we notify them before they come in for the briefing, right? Sorry, your income's too high. Of course, we don't tell anyone they make too much money because the cost of living is out of control. But for purposes of income targeting, which is a HUD requirement, HUD requires housing choice voucher agencies to serve at least 75% of all of our households at the extremely low income level on the income limits. That's 30% area median income, or AMI, or less. This program is intended to serve people with very limited income. And then we do have some flexibility with people who are in the very low income. That's that 50% area median income. So if you have a family who does not meet the extremely low income, but they do meet the very low income, we may have room for them. Again, we're going to dig into those details in our next session, but income isn't always a no. We do have a little wiggle room there. This is just a list of what we provided in the email this morning, and that will be attached to the training recording that's going to be put on the website. We always have a link with all of the handouts. We are also working on getting letters and processes always updated and put on our website. Just wanted to share with you what you received. Let's talk a little bit about resources. We have, my favorite resource, the administrative plan. That's where the Division of Housing takes the HUD regulations and here's the HUD regulations, and here's where HUD said we could make our own policies and procedures. That's our admin plan. Chapter 4 is applications, waiting list, and tenant selection. A lot of what we talked about today was pulled directly from that. What I also included as a handout or an attachment is HUD's HCV program guidebook. It is so good. It used to not be so good, but since 2019, they have been really digging into those chapters and making great changes to them. They do have one that talks about eligibility, determination, and denial of assistance. The link I've provided here is for all of their chapters from their guidebook that they have redone so far. This one's really good. It really takes that HUD regulation and it's funny because it's HUD that's creating the guidebook, but they're like translating their own language, and it's wonderful. I wouldn't have said that prior to 2019. I never would have shared the guidebook resource, but I love it now. And so if you like regulations and you like processes and administrative plans as much as I do, click on that link, you'll love it. We also have HUD Notice PIH 2009-36. It's old, but they haven't changed their requirements. This is about supplemental information to application for assistance. What do we need? What needs to be part of the application? What are we verifying? That is HUD speak. So maybe refer back up to the guidebook if that's not your kind of language. We, of course, have our webpage for the rental assistance programs, a contractor resource page. That's where we're saving our template letters when we feel like they're ready to be shared, our processes, our trainings, our action alerts. And then something we'll dig into a little in our next session is the Division of Housing Elite User Manual. Talks a lot about how do we get people on the waiting list? How do we change their preferences to update? How do we update their address when they tell us they've moved? So what's next? Stay tuned. Part 2, the next session in the waiting list series. We're going to talk about what this looks like in Elite. We're going to talk about how to navigate the EIV tools. Oh, one of the handouts that goes along with this was the application, I think it's called application draw process, that really digs into what we'll talk about next time. But step by step, what do you do? Okay, you've drawn their name. Go to HUD's EIV system. Do they already have a voucher somewhere else? Find that information out. If they do, they're not eligible, or they have to make a decision, right? Do they have a debts owed to another housing authority? HUD's very clear we can't serve somebody in many of our programs if they have a debt owed to another housing authority until that debt is satisfied with the housing authority, and so on. So we'll really dive into that and take a look at what we're asking you to do in EIV. We'll dig deeper into the eligibility testing. Okay, they're here. They've come to the top of the waiting list. What are we looking at really when we say they have eligible citizenship status, they're income eligible? What do we mean by that? We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about what that voucher briefing might look like. It looks different for everybody. Different ways you can do it to be more efficient, what you need to be providing to them, what happens then when you issue the voucher, and we'll highlight some best practices that we find are working right now in-house and at our agencies. So before we get to questions, I'm going to stop recording